Before this day is over, something may become impossible to ignore. A quiet turning point is unfolding beneath the surface of your love life, and while most people will move through today without recognizing it, you are here because you are meant to notice it before everyone else does. There are moments when the sky rearranges itself so subtly that only those paying close attention sense the shift. Then there are moments like this, when the emotional landscape changes with unmistakable force. Today belongs to the second kind. Venus is crossing into entirely new territory under conditions unlike anything it has experienced in decades, and that single movement carries consequences that reach far beyond ordinary romance. Instead of allowing uncertainty to linger, the universe is preparing to expose the difference between genuine devotion and empty investment with remarkable precision. Masks that once appeared convincing begin to lose their power. Excuses that sounded reasonable suddenly feel hollow. The emotional fog that made certain relationships difficult to evaluate starts dissolving, leaving only what is real standing in plain sight. This is not another routine planetary transition quietly passing in the background. The atmosphere surrounding this moment has been building for weeks, creating extraordinary pressure that is focused with almost surgical accuracy. For 3 particular zodiac signs, this pressure becomes deeply personal, arriving as a love experience that feels destined rather than accidental. The choices made during this period, and the truths revealed through them, have the potential to redirect the future of important relationships in ways that cannot easily be reversed. If you have noticed an unfamiliar weight sitting in your heart, if you struggle to explain the strange feeling that something inside your emotional world has been preparing to break open, there is a reason that sensation has become stronger with each passing day this week. Your intuition has been responding to an energetic change long before your logical mind could identify it. That growing awareness has not appeared without purpose. And as we move deeper into what is unfolding today, the reason behind that emotional signal will become much clearer. Before that explanation makes complete sense, however, it is important to understand the celestial movement creating this entire chain of events, because what is happening overhead reaches far beyond what it first appears to be. Whether you realize it consciously or not, your emotional body has already begun responding to it. At first glance, the 9th day of July may resemble any ordinary point on the calendar, yet beneath that familiar appearance lies an energetic dividing line. At 1:20 in the afternoon, Venus, the planet associated with affection, attraction, personal values, and the standards you believe you deserve within relationships, completes its passage through passionate Leo and enters practical Virgo. Venus changing zodiac signs is not unusual by itself. That cycle repeats regularly throughout astrology. What transforms this particular moment into something exceptional is the larger cosmic environment waiting to receive Venus as it arrives. During the year 2026, 3 of the solar system's most influential outer planets have each entered entirely new signs at nearly the same time. Uranus has moved into Gemini. Neptune has entered Aries. Pluto has established itself within Aquarius. A collective shift involving all 3 at once is extraordinarily uncommon. This is not the kind of alignment associated with an average year. It belongs to a much larger generational cycle, one capable of reshaping collective patterns over long periods of time. Even more significant, these powerful planetary forces currently participate in a rare geometric relationship known by some astrologers as a minor grand trine. Rather than creating chaotic conflict, this formation weaves together a network of supportive, yet intensely concentrated energy stretching across the heavens. Imagine an immense current flowing beneath the deepest part of the ocean. People standing safely on the shoreline never witness its movement directly, yet that invisible current influences everything above it. Ships adjust because of it. Tides respond because of it. Entire ecosystems depend upon forces hidden from casual observation. That is the role this celestial pattern is playing now. As Venus steps into Virgo today, it does not simply continue its journey. It enters the exact focal point where this hidden current becomes activated. Venus functions as the catalyst, the spark that reaches the waiting fuel. The momentum already exists. The pressure has already accumulated. Today's movement provides the ignition that allows those invisible forces to become visible through the experiences unfolding inside relationships. This process is not reserved for some distant future. It is not something delayed until another season. The emotional consequences begin this month, and in many cases they begin immediately. Love itself is entering a period where honesty becomes unavoidable. To understand why this transition carries such weight, it is necessary to understand the nature of Venus in Virgo. Traditional astrology describes Venus as being in its fall within Virgo. That description does not suggest weakness or failure. Instead, it points toward an environment that refuses to support illusion. Venus naturally gravitates toward beauty, pleasure, harmony, romance, elegance, affectionate words, and the dreamlike qualities that make love feel magical. Virgo approaches relationships from an entirely different perspective. It is not impressed by appearances alone. It asks a practical question that cuts through fantasy with remarkable efficiency. Does this relationship actually function in everyday life? Once Venus enters Virgo, emotional value begins shifting away from promises and toward evidence. Words lose influence when they are unsupported by consistent action. Romantic gestures become secondary if daily responsibilities are ignored. Beautiful messages cannot compensate for repeated absence during meaningful moments. Expressions of affection no longer carry the same weight unless they are matched by reliability, accountability, and the quiet discipline required to build a genuine partnership over time. Suddenly, love becomes less about performance and much more about presence. Yet this transformation also introduces a challenging shadow. Virgo possesses extraordinary observational ability. It notices contradictions that others overlook. It identifies inconsistencies between intentions and behavior. It recognizes the distance separating what someone repeatedly claims from what they consistently demonstrate. Under this influence, relationships undergo an examination that resembles a meticulous investigation rather than an emotional conversation. Every overlooked detail becomes visible. Every unresolved imbalance comes forward. Every weak foundation faces direct evaluation. This is why the current transit operates like a powerful sorting process rather than a simple romantic influence. Individuals who have relied upon charisma, imagined potential, or carefully maintained appearances instead of authentic commitment may discover that those strategies no longer succeed. The image they projected begins separating from the reality they created. The universe is effectively conducting a comprehensive review of your emotional life, carefully comparing appearance against substance, intention against action, promise against follow-through. Whether you feel prepared or not, the results of that examination are already moving toward the surface, and what becomes visible next has the power to redefine the direction of your relationships in lasting ways. Before the true challenge reveals itself, the universe offers something many people will mistake for an ordinary emotional moment. It arrives so quietly that it is easy to dismiss, yet it serves an essential purpose. Think of it as the calm breath your spirit is allowed to take before the next wave reaches the shore. If you remember the unexplained pressure that has been building inside your heart, the subtle feeling that something within your relationships has been preparing to change, then what unfolds on July 10th explains why those emotions have become impossible to ignore. Only hours after Venus enters Virgo, it forms an exact trine with Chiron, the wounded healer now traveling through Taurus. Among every astrological influence appearing throughout this month, this is one of the gentlest in appearance and one of the most profound in effect. even though very few people are recognizing its importance. Chiron in Taurus has been uncovering one of the deepest emotional wounds carried by so many people. It touches the quiet belief that somehow you are still not enough, not deserving enough, not beautiful enough, not valuable enough, not useful enough to receive a love that exists without conditions. This is the invisible story that often shapes your decisions without your awareness. It is the inner voice suggesting that affection must be earned through flawless behavior, endless patience, constant availability, or by accepting treatment that slowly diminishes your spirit. That wound has not appeared overnight. It has been influencing your choices for far longer than you may realize. Yet on July 10th, something inside that long-standing narrative begins to loosen. The harmonious trine between Venus and Chiron creates an opening where truth enters without force. It does not arrive through conflict or emotional chaos. Instead, it feels like finally taking a full breath after holding it for far too long. Suddenly, the reasons behind your past choices become visible. You recognize why you kept giving more than you received. You understand why you remained in situations that required you to make yourself smaller so someone else could remain comfortable. You begin seeing every compromise through a completely different lens. Rather than blaming yourself, you recognize the wound that convinced you such sacrifices were necessary. At that very moment, something powerful settles within you. It is not fueled by resentment. It is not driven by bitterness. It is built upon quiet certainty. Perhaps for the first time with complete conviction, you understand that respect should never be treated as a reward earned through exhaustion. Your worth cannot be measured by how much of yourself you sacrifice to satisfy another person. That realization is not arriving by accident. The timing is intentional, because this healing prepares you for what follows. Without this renewed foundation of self-respect, the next stage would feel almost impossible to navigate. Every lesson received during this gentle moment becomes emotional armor for what is waiting immediately ahead. Then July 11th arrives, and the emotional landscape changes dramatically. What once felt uncertain becomes impossible to ignore. On this day, Venus forms an exact alignment with the south node of the moon in Virgo, and this is where the energy grows unmistakably serious. The south node has long been associated with karmic release. It represents familiar patterns that have completed their purpose, attachments that once felt necessary but now prevent further growth, and emotional habits that continue repeating only because they have become comfortable through repetition. It reflects relationships, beliefs, and behaviors that once offered security but gradually began limiting your evolution. When Venus, the planet governing love, attraction, and emotional values, meets this karmic point, the result is a relational reckoning that cannot be postponed. Connections sustained primarily through obligation, routine, financial dependence, or fear of loneliness begin revealing their true emotional weight. The burden you struggled to explain suddenly becomes obvious. The relationship you've spent months, perhaps even years, attempting to repair, especially one where your emotional effort has never been matched by the other person, begins feeling too heavy to continue carrying. What once seemed manageable now feels impossible to ignore because your heart no longer agrees to support what your soul has already outgrown. There is another dimension to this transit that often surprises people. Alignments involving the South Node are well known for reopening doors to the past. Someone whose presence once shaped your emotional world may unexpectedly return. It could be a former partner, someone you once loved deeply, or an individual whose energy still feels strangely familiar despite the passage of time. A message may arrive without warning. A chance meeting may occur that appears far too unlikely to dismiss, yet appearances can be misleading. This return should not automatically be interpreted as destiny offering another opportunity. Instead, it functions as an examination of your growth. The universe is placing a familiar situation before you to discover whether your choices have truly changed. Will you repeat the same emotional cycle simply because it feels familiar? Will you surrender the self-respect you only recently reclaimed? Or will you recognize the pattern immediately and respond from a place of greater wisdom instead of old conditioning? The lesson carried by July 11th is remarkably clear. Release what no longer honors your future. Release the belief that every broken relationship must be repaired. Release the exhausting responsibility of rescuing people who never valued the sacrifices you willingly made. Allow what has reached its conclusion to end with dignity rather than extending its lifespan through guilt alone. Even though that realization may feel intimidating, it serves only as preparation because another far more intense moment follows shortly afterward. By the time July 13th arrives, everything begins accelerating. If July 11th functions as an honest review of your emotional history, then July 13th becomes the decisive moment when hidden tensions finally demand expression. Pay careful attention to this day because its astrological structure is exceptionally rare. Within the space of only 6 hours, Venus positioned at 4 degrees of Virgo forms 3 exact and highly charged aspects involving the 3 most influential outer planets in the solar system. It creates a square with Uranus. It forms a quincunx with Neptune. It also forms a quincunx with Pluto. All 3 exact interactions occur within the same 6-hour period. That concentration of planetary activity is extraordinary. To understand why this carries such significance, it is important to recognize the larger celestial framework already in motion. Neptune and Pluto are themselves participating in a long-term cooperative relationship through a sextile, establishing a broader energetic foundation that supports everything now beginning to unfold. As this configuration reaches its exact formation, the intensity becomes impossible to dismiss. Venus arrives at a position exactly 150 degrees from both Neptune and Pluto, at the same time creating one of the rarest and most pressurized patterns recognized in astrology, a yod, often referred to as the finger of God. Even its traditional name hints at the magnitude of what it represents. This is not an influence that quietly drifts into your life. A yod concentrates enormous energetic force into a single destination, creating pressure that continues building until something can no longer remain unchanged. At the foundation of this pattern stand Neptune and Pluto, already connected through their long-term sextile, steadily generating a profound current of transformational energy. Instead of dispersing that power across multiple areas of life, the geometry of the yod channels everything toward one focal point. That point is Venus, the planet governing love, attraction, relationships, personal values, and the way your heart measures emotional safety. Every lesson, every realization, every hidden truth becomes focused through the most intimate part of your emotional experience. Neptune contributes one part of this process through its quincunx to Venus. Under this influence, fantasies lose their ability to survive. The carefully constructed image you have been holding on to, the hopeful version of another person you continued believing would eventually become reality. The explanations you repeated to justify remaining in situations that repeatedly disappointed you all begin dissolving. What remains is not the story you wished were true, but the reality that has been quietly waiting beneath it all along. Truth arrives without asking permission. It does not soften itself to protect your expectations, nor does it reshape itself to preserve emotional comfort. It simply reveals what has always existed, whether your heart feels prepared to witness it or not. Pluto contributes the second part of the transformation through its own quincunx. Instead of dissolving illusion, Pluto uncovers hidden structures of power that have operated beneath the surface of your relationships. Emotional control that once escaped your awareness suddenly becomes unmistakable. Patterns of manipulation emerge into full view. Situations where one individual consistently possessed the advantage, while the other repeatedly sacrificed their own needs, become impossible to ignore. Financial dependence that quietly maintained unhealthy dynamics begins demanding honest evaluation. Emotional burdens you accepted as your responsibility reveal themselves as weight that was never yours to carry in the first place. Pluto refuses superficial solutions. It insists that everything concealed beneath appearances rise into conscious awareness. And when that process begins, it often feels intense, because what has remained buried for so long finally demands acknowledgement. As powerful as those influences already are, another force arrives simultaneously. Venus forms a square with Uranus, the planet associated with liberation, disruption, awakening, and sudden change. Squares create friction that cannot simply be observed from a distance. They require action. They force movement where stagnation once existed. Uranus rarely operates through gradual negotiation. It interrupts, surprises, and overturns established patterns without waiting for permission. As July 13th unfolds, expect developments that appear without warning. Information that was hidden may suddenly become impossible to conceal. A conversation you never expected could change everything within moments. A confession may arrive unexpectedly. A message could reveal what had remained secret. Or perhaps the most significant revelation occurs entirely within you, when a realization strikes with such unmistakable certainty that it feels almost physical, arriving in the quiet hours of the night like lightning illuminating an entire landscape at once. You look across at someone you believed you understood, and in a single instant you recognize that your perception has permanently changed. Once that awareness arrives, there is no returning to the version of reality that existed before. This is the true meaning of the destined examination surrounding love. The universe is no longer presenting subtle hints or gentle invitations. Instead, it places undeniable evidence directly before you. What becomes visible on this day cannot simply be forgotten, because genuine awareness changes every decision that follows. Although everyone will experience echoes of this extraordinary alignment, 3 zodiac signs stand closest to its center. If your sun, moon, rising, or Venus occupies one of these signs, the month of July during the year 2026 becomes especially significant, asking you to confront truths that can no longer be postponed. For Virgo, this experience reaches the deepest layers of personal identity because Venus now travels through your first house, the area connected with your sense of self, your physical presence, and the image you carry into the world. Rather than observing this transformation from the outside, you become its living expression. Almost immediately, you may notice your energy changing. Others begin responding to you differently. Your presence carries increased attraction. Attention arrives from unexpected directions, yet beneath that visible magnetism, a far more important process is taking place. The universe begins examining one of your oldest emotional habits with remarkable precision: the tendency to invest extraordinary effort into repairing everyone around you while quietly neglecting your own well-being. The South Node has already been moving through your sign, gradually dismantling old attachments to perfectionism and excessive control. With Venus now joining that process, the emotional lessons intensify. Individuals who have repeatedly depended upon your kindness, while treating your loyalty as something ordinary instead of precious, become impossible to misunderstand. Their behavior reveals itself with extraordinary clarity. At the same time, the square from Uranus activates your career sector, suggesting that unexpected developments involving work, public recognition, or a change in professional direction may become the very catalyst exposing weaknesses that have existed within your closest relationships all along. As circumstances shift, you begin recognizing that much of your emotional energy has been spent supporting another person's priorities while your own foundation slowly weakened beneath your feet. The essential lesson presented to Virgo centers upon boundaries that cannot be compromised. Can you stop defending behavior that repeatedly harms you? Can you release the endless internal explanations that excuse treatment you would never recommend for someone you love? Can you finally believe that partnership should involve equal investment rather than one person endlessly giving while the other endlessly receives? Choosing self-respect becomes the defining decision. And should you embrace that choice, the freedom waiting beyond this lesson has the power to transform your emotional life in ways you have never previously experienced. For Pisces, the story unfolds through an entirely different landscape. Venus now moves through your seventh house, the domain governing committed partnerships, intimate bonds, and the mirrors through which relationships reveal your deepest truths. During this period, those reflections become exceptionally difficult to avoid. Pisces possesses an extraordinary capacity for unconditional love, profound compassion, and spiritual connection. Yet every strength carries its corresponding vulnerability. Your remarkable empathy often encourages you to fall in love not only with who someone is today, but with the person you believe they could eventually become. You recognize hidden possibilities within people. You imagine the future version that may emerge if they heal their wounds, embrace their potential, or finally awaken to the greatness you already see within them. Because of that vision, you wait longer than others might. You continue believing. You continue sacrificing. You continue pouring your heart into a future that exists more vividly in your imagination than in the present reality. That pattern now stands before the universe for honest evaluation. For Pisces, this is where hope encounters reality in its purest form. Venus, traveling through Virgo, is not interested in promises, intentions, or imagined futures. It asks for evidence. It looks for consistency that can be observed, reliability that repeats itself day after day, and actions that carry more weight than beautiful declarations ever could. As the yod reaches full activation within your partnership sector, the distance between what someone has consistently told you and what they have consistently demonstrated becomes unmistakably clear. There is no longer enough emotional fog to blur the difference. At the very same time, Uranus sends its disruptive influence into your fourth house, the place connected with home, emotional foundations, family, and the environment where you seek security. That energy can appear through an unexpected shift involving your living situation, or through a revelation connected to someone you believed you knew completely. Hidden parts of a partner's life may suddenly become visible. The place that once represented comfort may unexpectedly feel unfamiliar, almost as though you are sharing your life with someone you are only now beginning to understand. The question placed before Pisces is remarkably straightforward, even if answering it feels incredibly painful. Can you stop investing your heart in who someone might eventually become and begin responding honestly to who they are today? Can your extraordinary capacity for compassion become rooted in something stable enough to support your own well-being, instead of existing only as endless sacrifice? If another person cannot meet you in reality rather than possibility, then the universe gently but firmly asks you to release them. Not because your love was insufficient, but because your relationship with yourself has finally become strong enough to deserve the same devotion you have always offered everyone else. Gemini experiences this period in an entirely different way. Rather than unfolding gradually, change arrives with breathtaking speed. Uranus has recently entered your sign, beginning a profound reconstruction of your identity from the inside outward. Your perspective is evolving. Your priorities are shifting. Even the way you carry yourself begins reflecting a version of you that no longer accepts unnecessary limitation. The self that once tolerated confinement, excessive compromise, or subtle control is rapidly disappearing. While this inner transformation continues, Venus moves through your fourth house, highlighting home, emotional security, and the private life you have carefully built. On July 13th, The square between Venus occupying your fourth house and Uranus, traveling through your first house, creates direct tension between the person you are becoming and the life that currently surrounds you. Emotionally, this may feel like an overwhelming need for space. If your relationship has gradually transformed into an environment where every day feels identical, where your growth has quietly been restricted, where your independence has slowly been replaced by routine, something deep within your spirit reaches its limit. This realization does not develop little by little. It arrives all at once, like pressure finally becoming too great for restraint. The central lesson for Gemini concerns remaining true to yourself while intense emotions are demanding immediate action. One temptation during this transit involves confusing restlessness with incompatibility. There may be moments when the desire for change becomes so powerful that destroying something stable appears easier than carefully examining what actually needs transformation. Yet this same energy also carries extraordinary potential. If your relationship genuinely encourages your evolution, supports your individuality, and welcomes your continued growth, then this transit can elevate that partnership into a new level of honesty, authenticity, and shared freedom. However, if the relationship truly limits who you are becoming, Gemini possesses the courage to end what no longer belongs in your future with remarkable speed, leaving even yourself surprised by the certainty of your decision. As the second half of July unfolds, the consequences of everything awakened during the middle of the month begin settling into everyday life. Powerful revelations never disappear the moment they occur. Instead, they require integration, reflection, and responsibility. On July 23rd, Venus forms a challenging aspect with retrograde Saturn. The emotional excitement created by Uranus now gives way to practical reality. Responsibilities that cannot be avoided begin demanding attention. Shared financial obligations still require resolution. Living arrangements continue existing even after emotional decisions have been made. Conversations postponed for far too long must finally take place, despite every instinct encouraging avoidance. Saturn insists that emotional breakthroughs be supported by practical action, reminding you that genuine transformation extends beyond feelings into the structure of daily life itself. A few days later, on July 27th, a minor aspect involving Pluto once again brings underlying power dynamics into focus. Issues that appeared settled may unexpectedly return, creating a subtle but meaningful temptation to revisit situations that have already demonstrated why they cannot continue unchanged. Memories soften. Doubts begin whispering familiar questions. Perhaps it was not really that serious. Perhaps you misunderstood. Perhaps leaving was unnecessary. This moment becomes another important examination of your growth, because the greatest challenge is rarely making the initial decision. It is remaining faithful to that decision once nostalgia begins rewriting the past. Finally, the month reaches its closing chapter on July 29th, when Venus forms a square with Mars in Gemini, while a full moon rises in Aquarius. This combination delivers the emotional climax toward which the entire month has been moving. For some, it becomes an honest conversation filled with long overdue emotion, allowing hidden feelings to finally find expression. For others, it represents the unmistakable conclusion of a relationship that has already reached its natural ending. Whatever form this final scene takes, clarity replaces uncertainty. The emotional atmosphere begins clearing, making space for a future no longer built upon illusion. None of these experiences should be mistaken for punishment. They represent liberation through truth. The intensity of these weeks may feel overwhelming, yet every revelation serves a deeper purpose. The universe is not attempting to cause unnecessary pain. Instead, it refuses to allow you to spend another year investing your heart where your value is neither recognized nor returned. Venus moving through Virgo during July of 2026 operates with extraordinary precision. It removes what has only appeared authentic, so that genuine connection has the opportunity to flourish. Those willing to face uncomfortable truths about their relationships, their emotional habits, and their own patterns will discover something far more valuable than temporary comfort. Waiting beyond these lessons is the possibility of a relationship where authenticity replaces performance, where respect no longer needs to be earned through sacrifice, and where love never requires you to become smaller than the person you were always meant to be. By the time this month reaches its conclusion, the universe will have revealed who truly recognizes your worth. More importantly, you will recognize it for yourself. If you have stayed with me through this entire journey, thank you for sharing your time and attention. If this message resonated with you and you would like to continue exploring future astrological insights together, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support makes it possible to continue creating this content. I would also love to hear your thoughts and personal experiences in the comments, because every story adds another perspective to this collective journey. Until we meet again, take good care of yourself, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.